Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Mon Guys podcast. We're slowly starting everything. It's our first podcast, so we're making sure to iron out all the bugs and everything. I'm Max Nui. I'm the producer and director. I'm sure you guys have seen me a couple of times on the channel. So, first of all, can everybody hear me? Because that is an important part of a podcast. So can you drop in the chat if you can hear me? Just because we've had a few technical difficulties, so I want to make sure everything's working.
That's not promising.
Oh God.
There's a few seconds delay is the thing here. That's what I noticed. Is that I was listening to silence on the YouTube video and it took like a solid, I think it
He
was 10
can't.
seconds.
Okay.
You
Okay.
are
Cool.
audible.
Good. Oh, thank God.
Yeah, I'm just saying you're audible. It's just there's a delay between when you speak it and when it actually is shown in the live stream. That's just how it rolls.
Yeah.
That's so that you can have an editor bleeping out all of the intensive cussing we're about to do.
Yeah. True.
Exactly.
This is an adult podcast. Thank you. So we can say the F word.
Swearing like Skakdi sailors.
The F word being, of course, the Faxon.
What the faux rock are you talking about?
All right, so I think we have enough people. Obviously, we're going to be recording this and re-releasing it as a video. Anybody can watch it anytime, so no worries there. Let's go ahead and jump into what we're going to talk about. So let me pull up my notes. You got to have notes. That's important. You see, look at me. What a rookie! I don't even have my notes pulled up. All right, here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mon Guys podcast, where we bring on the talented man and woman guys behind the Mon Guy project to discuss the series. So this morning, or I guess it's depending on where you are. It's this morning or this afternoon, but we are going to be talking about the history of the Matoran universe from the perspective of the Matoran, which is something that the 2001 story started out with, but as the series went on, we kind of changed perspectives and we lost that mysterious mythology that made Bionicle so special. And so what we're trying to do here is reintroduce everybody or introduce them for the first time to the Bionicle lore from the perspective of the Matoran and from the perspective of the manga series. So then you don't have to worry about jumping on a wiki and trying to figure out, like if you don't know who Toa Lee Khan is, and then you want to find out, you don't want to go to a wiki and look through and see, oh well, he, like all of these things that happened to him even during the manga series and after the manga series. This is a way to experience everything spoiler free without worrying about getting those spoiler jump scares. So I guess we can go ahead and get started with introductions. So the first person we're going to talk about is Basil. Basil, can you go ahead and introduce yourself and also mention the first Bionicle set you ever owned?
Boy. Well, hi everybody. I'm A Pinch of Basil from the YouTube channel A Pinch of Basil, video editor and shitpost enthusiast. And my first Bionicle set was, to my everlasting shame, the Zamor Sphere pack from 2006.
Incredible.
I was a very dumb 8-year-old, and I saw a picture of the Mother Paraka in the background and thought, oh, it'll include these little golden balls and the set. I'm getting my money's worth in this tiny little $5 box.
Yeah, so
As he was
for those who don't
As he was supposed to
know,
find out, I was lied to, of course.
yeah, for those who don't know, the Zamor Sphere or the set he's talking about, it was this like little promotional polybag thing that didn't it wasn't it just intended to show the like mechanical function for that year?
believe so, yeah. Even though, like, unlike some of the other extra ammo parts, like the Kanoka disc pack or the squid pack, that one didn't actually come with its own launcher, just the spheres.
Oh
So you
wait.
just all you get are a bunch of little balls, and hey, at least they're fancy metal colors, so that's nice, I guess.
Ah, Basil likes balls. What can you say?
Basil and balls, yeah.
So I wanted to ask you what do you do on the Mongai project? Like what is your role in the team that you find yourself in and all of that?
I'm the member of the publicity and story teams. So on the one end, I help working on writing and drafting stuff for the marketing and advertisements, and on the other hand, help to write scripts for the show and short stories for the Tales of the Mind Guy short story series.
Awesome. And you just recently wrote or we just recently published one of the Tales of the Mongai that you wrote, correct?
That you did. You have published part one so far because I don't know when to stop.
Yeah, and that's Tales of the Mongai Chapter 3 Tidings of Duma, which you can see on our website, and we'll also post a link in the description. Of course, we love I love to plug our stuff. That's how it is. All right, so the next person on our intellectual panel this evening is Myotis. So Myotis, you want to introduce yourself really quick and just give us a little background and what was your first Bionicle and where do you work on the Mongai project?
All right. Hi everybody. My name's Myotis, but you can call me Myotis. Um, I do a whole bunch of various projects. I do some writing, working on a tabletop role-playing game, but none of them are ready to consider being released, so you're just gonna have to wait around for those. My first ever Bionicle set back in 2007 was the most glorious product LEGO has ever created, Gadunka. And
Holy gadunka!
that led me through a very complicated series of events to join the Mongai project on the publicity team. And I do a lot of graphic design work. Several of the character posters that show up were edited by me. Not the art, just the editing. Designer. Uh, and I do various other random tasks, a bit of video editing, random odd jobs, essentially.
Whatever
Yes,
we
yes.
require.
Yeah, the big he's basically he's one of the two members on the graphic design squad. We have Timeline and we have Myotis, who like one of you guys are always working on some kind of promotional material.
Yeah.
All right, so that is Basil and Myotis. So I guess I will introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Max Nui. I'm a relative newcomer to the Bionicle community. I've owned Bionicles in the past, and like I think my first set was Toa Gali all the way back in 2001. So they've been around my whole life, but I didn't really jump into the community. The struggles of living at a house that didn't have great internet, but I joined the community about 2 years ago with my Instagram, and I used that as a platform to start this passion project of mine called the Mongai Project, which would be a series, to follow the exploits of the Toa Mongai, who were these ancient heroes in the Bionicle lore that I felt didn't get the spotlight they deserved in the canon. So that's basically who I am. In terms of project functionality, I am the executive producer slash director of everything, which means that I'm just in every possible meeting that exists on our Discord channel, and I just have I have my hands in a lot of things. So that's me and who I am in the project. So
If you would like to learn more about Max Nui, you can watch Interviews with Item Number 1, Max Nui, which is available on our YouTube channel.
yes, you can do that. You'll have to see my glorious pre-grown in facial hair that I was working on at the time. I mean, it's not that much better now, but it's at least gotten a little better.
We all had to stomach our COVID time skips one way or another.
Yeah. And of course, I'm also the face in the Bionicle Day live stream, so that was also me back whenever I mean I'm still fat right now, but I'm a little skinnier than I was then. All right, so we are going to hop into business now. We're going to start talking about the Matoran timeline. So, Basil, can you walk us through these sections here and kind of break down just an overhead of what we're going to be talking about today, specifically the two sections that we're going to be talking about today?
You got it. So, well, I'll start with the opening blurb and we'll go from there. In the time before time, great beings from a land beyond our own created an empty universe. To inhabit it, they brought forth smaller beings called the Matoran, created to bring structure and form to this new world. And today we'll be discussing the first two eras of this timeline: the time of darkness, where the universe was constructed, and the time of light, when Mata Nui awakened.
Okay.
He came up with that just now.
Anyway, all right. So we're starting all the way at the beginning of the universe. So we aren't expecting you guys to know anything ahead of time, and just sit down, buckle up, and get ready for the ride. All right. So under the darkness section of the timeline, everything kind of starts in darkness. It's one of those stories. So let's talk about that.
Real spooky. No ghost yet, though, because nothing's decided to leave a ghost, so don't have to worry about that.
Yeah. So basically, these Matoran come into existence. Now, what exactly are Matoran? Like, this is a big fundamental um, species in the Bionicle lore. But what exactly are they? Is, I guess, the best place to start.
Well, I guess to start, they are the fundamental little worker bees of the universe, the main population that is tasked with maintaining everything and building and working and making sure everything is transpiring as it's supposed to.
Mhm.
While everyone else, there are other species, but they all have much more specialized tasks, whereas the Matoran are pretty much the major jack of all trades.
Yeah. So they so
Or, for
they
those of you less familiar with Bionicle, to put it simply, they are the little sets.
yeah,
The
that's
little
that's a great
guys,
explanation. But
the little
basically they are the if you think about, like, I don't know, I'm trying to think, like, popular media, like the MCU, or whatever. They are the citizens who make sure, the world is turning and everything's happening the way it should happen. But they usually aren't the heroes, or they usually aren't the characters who go out of their way to do the heroic things and save people and do all of the, that's a job reserved to others. They are specifically there for, to keep the world, working, to go to their jobs and do their stuff and exist. Now, there are a couple of different, like, they aren't all the same. There are some differences among the Matoran at this time. So let's talk about those.
Yeah, to go from there, like the Matoran are the jack of all trades, but to that end, they are all split off into various tribes based off of the elements the universe is comprised of. At first, you had the Avatoran, the Matoran of Light, whose main function was to help construct the core of the universe, and whose light helped guide the other Matoran through their own tasks throughout this dark and lightless time.
So they were
Whereas
the
other
were they
Matoran,
the first Matoran created, or were they?
yes,
Okay.
and then from there, you have other Matoran based off elements like fire, earth, water, air, ice, etc. Each of them imbued with little specialties that were tailored to certain tasks. The Tomatoran of fire could brave greater temperatures. The Pomatoran of stone had skilled hands that could erect the most intricate structures throughout the universe. The Yonomatoran of earth brought strength to shoulder the heaviest labors. The Matoran of water, the Gamatoran, could breathe for extended periods and venture deep into the depths of the Protoderma Sea, etc., etc.
Okay, and so each of these talents or skills were used in ways that would assist them in their particular vocation. I imagine, like if you have some people working on pipes or people who or like Matoran doing those things, they'd probably be Ga Matoran. But if you Matoran of water, and then if you have like somebody working on the way on the top of like a skyscraper or something like that, you probably want to lay Matoran a Matoran of air up there.
Pretty much.
Okay, cool. And then, in addition to the primary elements of fire, earth, water, air, ice, and stone, there were a couple of secondary elements, correct?
Yes, your sonics, your gravity, your plasma, your magnetism, plant life, lightning, iron. A lot of more eclectic stuff, but usually tailored to the same idea one way or another. For instance, like, what was it? I believe it was Sonic's Matoran that were more sensitive to sound, so, they would be the kind that you would employ for much more, what's the word? Temperamental tasks to that anything that revolved you having like a strong sense of hearing, anything like that. Plasma would presumably, have the same sort of endurance to Torrent of Fire do, and so on and so forth. Everyone's a little tailored to their specific elements, even if they're not quite as empowered as, say, a Toa, which we'll get to later.
So a lot of those secondary elements sound like there could be a fair bit of overlap with the primary element, like plasma and fire, for instance, or potentially gravity and earth. So would it be fair to say that the secondary elements are more like a specialist within a field?
I could
Well,
see
that
that. Yeah, yeah.
we'll
It's
pretend the great beings we'll pretend the great beings weren't a redundant bunch.
yeah. I imagine just because there were the great beings who created the Matoran, they since there were there was more than one great being working on it, there is the potential that maybe it was more of a petty thing and less of a functional thing. But I think the best way to look at it is to imagine that it is designed well, and it was probably a more specialized type thing, because I know that there were less Matoran of those secondary elements.
Right. And these great beings, we mention them every now and then, but would the Matoran actually know who they are at this point?
The Matoran would have been aware of them to the extent that they knew they were created by them, and that these beings had incredible power. But they would be completely unaware of any other traits that these great beings had. So the great beings are very much a mystery within the history of the Matoran.
Yeah, from their perspective, they're just the grand, faceless architects that occasionally wandered their world, but they never really had a name or a personality to place to any of them.
Yeah, and so another thing we should probably talk about in this era of creation and aimless toil is the Matoran and characterization and personality, which is something that we are very familiar with them having in the later story. Like, this is something that comes about. But what were their personalities like at the inception of the universe?
I guess you'd want to say lack thereof in this case, since during this time, a lot of this period of time in the Matoran universe is very hazy and not remembered all that clearly. And to that end, a lot of Matoran weren't exactly defined all that much outside of like their designated task.
So
Just
it
because
was
like all they were was their purpose, what the great beings created for them to be, and that's all they really lived to serve.
just enough personality to get the job done and communicate, but nothing unnecessary.
Exactly.
Okay, so when these Matoran were created, they were created for one specific purpose, which was to create the universe that they would inhabit. However, they didn't know this until the universe was created, of course, but at this time they worked completely in darkness, except for the light of the Matoran, who led them, the Matoran of Light, who led them around and gave them small pockets of illumination to build. And just to clarify, they did not. If they didn't know what they were building, how did they? Um, how? I guess the question that I have is, if they didn't know the big picture of what they were building, how did they know what to build at a small scale?
That's where our good old buddy Tren Crom comes into play. From the Matoran's perspective, he was a mysterious, unseen voice who they only knew by name, guiding the Matoran for their various tasks about the universe. While they didn't necessarily know what they were doing, what they had to do was constantly talked through and ordered through this strange, ambiguous being.
So would it be similar to like a hive mind type thing, like a shared consciousness, or is it just like orders coming in, almost like a uh, kind of like the relationship between a deity speaking to, like its people or something like that.
Be the latter, yeah. Since at this time, before Mata Nui comes into existence, Tren Crom is essentially serving that role, but on a more direct level, since he's not necessarily governing the universe in the same way. He's not the universe itself, but he is sort of this guiding presence that's helping to usher and shepherd everybody around to get what they need to get done without necessarily becoming directly involved.
Okay, and so to explain the whole, to be more specific, I think like this role that Tren Crom inhabits, this mysterious figure, I would call that the role of the Matoran came to call that the role of the Great Spirit, like a spirit that exists beyond the physical realm of their understanding, that permeates the universe and gives them instructions, like information, and passes its will onto them. And we're gonna
I
hear,
think they.
or
I'm
we're
sorry.
gonna hear that idea of the Great Spirit come up more as the history goes on.
Now, Tren Crom never got his own set, which, so if you haven't heard of him, there's a good reason. But how did the Matoran, with what little personalities they had, feel about and react to this deity-like force telling them what to do?
I think the best way to explain that will be to look at how they react to Mata Nui later, a character that they more directly revere and refer to as the Great Spirit. With Tren Crom, they never really elevated him to that kind of title despite him having a similar, rank and power. And I think a big part of it is just the fact that in this time of darkness and in a very cold and utilitarian way he managed them, he wasn't really looked at as favorably even during this time. Matoran were a little afraid of the guy. They don't. There's less of a paternal warmth to really comfort them the same way Mata Nui does later down the road. So Tren Crom is respected but feared to an extent. He is the unknown, and even at this time, the unknown is not a very comforting feeling to the Matoran,
It's a
or
sim.
anyone else for that matter.
I mean, it would certainly freak me out if everything was completely dark and I was hearing a voice in my head telling me, "Hey, put this screw in here, hammer this." I don't think I would appreciate that very much. So it's understandable. All right, so we talked a little bit about Tren Crom and just the fact that he is this unknown entity. Let's talk a little bit about what exactly they were constructing. Because they were functioning in this complete, dark void, building something, but they weren't just building anything. They were building something very specific. They were building some islands. So let's talk about what those islands were.
In the beginning, they constructed the first three. You had Mata Nui, you had Artaka, and you had Karzani. These sort of formed a core trinity from which all other forms of Matoran life would expand from later down the road. But these main three were supposed to be forming this sort of cycle of labor of which all Matoran life would revolve around. Mata Nui being the core city where most labor took place, this sort of being you might even call it the brain of the universe, if you will. Whereas Artaka and Karzani were more seen as, respectively, reward and punishment for Matoran that were either excelling or failing at their labors. Artaka rewarding those that were especially talented and giving them special place to continue their work, whereas Karzani was more served to either repair Matoran that were damaged or to temporarily punish those that were not performing as highly as they should.
So not quite a like heaven or hell type idea, but the sentiment kind of applies where, there's like a good place that you go if you work really well, and there is a bad place that you can go if you work poorly.
Essentially, yeah. Though, of course, at this time, not a lot of these are being put into use. They're still being constructed, but that's the role they will serve once everything is said and done. But these are the main three that they're focused on building before the universe finally comes to light.
All right, so yeah, and basically how the idea of how this would function, is what I guess another question with this is at this time, what happens if, say, I am a Matoran working on a bridge, and the bridge collapses and my leg snaps off, like I break my leg or something like that. What happens to me in that situation?
Well, Tarsani isn't just a place for punishment. If you can't be repaired by your own fellow villagers, you would still be sent there to at least be put back together and sent back to work. Ideally, it wasn't just for punishment for people who weren't laboring properly. It was also meant to be a means to repair those that were damaged or unable to perform as well as they needed to. It was a bit of both. So it wasn't necessarily just a hell to the Matoran, depending on how
It
you approached it.
it was rehabilitation.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that then they would go to Karzani and get repaired, whatever. And I guess maybe in some way that was like if you got injured or something, that also um, then maybe that was also considered bad labor, or I mean, ideally, you would live in a world where maybe you're a great worker every day of your life, and then, if you get injured once, like in an ideal situation, you would be rewarded for that hard work. But when it's such a functional model that the Matoran existed within, where if you lost your capacity to work, you would probably be treated as a bad worker and sent to Karzani to be repaired or to be. So yeah, there are a lot of injustices in the early universe, to say the least. So okay, now we get to talk about Toa. So during this time, there
Those are
was
the regular sets, by the way.
yeah
Like
the
the
you have
eight,
this.
$9 canister. Yeah.
So
That's the red one we all talk about and love.
now the first Toa was not was she was built from scratch, right? She was not she did
It
not come.
was.
Yeah. So who was that? Let's talk about Helrix for a minute.
So the thing about like the first Matoran being built as Matoran, the first Toa, and as we'll discuss later, the first Saraga were built as such. While all three of these would eventually form a little cycle of life and evolution from one to the next. In the beginning, each were created as they are to help sort of serve as the prime examples of the roles that these species would have to perform for the universe. So for the Toa, the first of those was Helrix, a Toa of water, who helped spearhead a lot of the efforts to put together Mata Nui.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the differences between Toa and Matoran. So we talked I know we mentioned a minute ago the height difference, so Toa are usually twice the size of a Matoran, and along with that comes some greater physical capabilities. They're stronger, they can run faster, jump higher, lift bigger things. Um, but there's a little more to it than that. So what about their elemental capabilities?
So we discussed earlier how each of the Matoran were separated into specific elements. They granted them, specialized talents to help them serve their labor. But as Toa, a lot of those individual talents become elevated, and they finally get to exercise actual influence over the elements they're associated with. So Toa of Fire can actually control fire if they're not just a little more immune to it. Same with Toa of Water and Toa of Earth. They can all exercise proper control with these elements and actually, you know, use them and shift them to their will. Essentially, they have the ability to literally shape and control the universe itself.
Yeah, so kind of if you guys have ever seen something like Avatar: The Last Airbender, or I guess any film or any show that has characters who can control and move the elements, something similar to that. So Helrix was a Toa of water, so she was able to manipulate um, liquids around her and be able to like mold them and form them and blast them at things, and different stuff that would have been needed in the construction of the universe, as well as possibly defending them against things that entered the universe. Like the great beings might not have been the only things that accidentally entered the universe at this time. So there's something to consider there.
There were things that went bump in the night, and the Toa were the ones to deal with them.
Yeah, I'm looking at the chat right now, and they're talking about this cannon model. So we won't get.
The actual canon one is made of noodles. I don't know what this thing is.
Yeah, there's this whole canonization contest lore with Helrix, but yeah, justice for Noodle Ricks.
There's a
Okay,
Noodle Ricks in all of us.
they're just waiting to get out. Yeah, so Helrix was created, and she has. So the Matoran all wear masks on their face, right? But the masks don't really serve too much of a purpose besides just.
Keeping them alive.
Well, I mean, I guess yeah, we should talk about that. So the
Well,
masks
so
on their face are called kanoi, and they all kind of have different designs. And for the Matoran, is it that they have to have a kanoi on their face in order to, or it's like if they have one, if they don't have their mask on for too long, they like, yeah, how exactly do they die from that? I can't remember.
I don't believe they die. They just go into a coma. Same. Toa
Right.
don't. Toa are weakened, while Matoran will straight up go into a coma without their mask for long. So masks are essentially a way to maintain focus for the Matoran and the sense of a sense of self.
Yeah, and at this time, the masks were just like purely functional in the sense of they need them to stay alive. So, so here, stay out of being in a coma. So here are their kanohi, but the Toa
And
actually use them in a different capacity.
Yes. So whereas Matoran would not have the mental capabilities to handle greater power for their masks, being a Toa means that they are capable of accessing whichever abilities their mask can possess. Now, if the thing about masks is that they're forged from Kanoka discs, which also all have like their own special little powers, and depending on how you forge them and combine them, you can make very interesting Kanohi masks with different powers, and these powers are things that the Toa can access whenever they wear one. So, masks that can give you shielding, or the ability to breathe water, or fly, or run really fast.
Since we're on the subject of Helrix, hers is the mask of psychometry, which isn't that the ability to touch an object and visually see its past?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's correct. So
do you
that's an
think
example of a mask power.
And in that case, you can actually kind of see how it would be useful in these early stages of building the universe. Like, if Matoran messes something up or somebody finds that something goes wrong, Helrix can come in and use that mask power to visualize the history of that misplaced piece and figure out just what happened to it, what went wrong, and how we can fix it.
You're telling me Helrix is a freaking narc? What the heck? She's ratting out the Matoran who screwed up the like this person put in this brick sideways. Let's dox him in his entire history and like go find him.
She's
Is there
not just
any
any narc.
evidence that that's not what she did?
She's the first. She's not just any narc. She's the first narc. She's the narc of all narcs.
Incredible. But yeah, so Kanohi can do a lot of really cool things. Helrix was created as a Toa, and so at this time there were 6 other Toa who were also created, called the Toa Mata. And
You might
Mata
know
being
them. They were the first canister sets way back in 2001.
yeah. Yeah, so Mata refers to the fact that it's the first name of the great spirit Mata Nui, which we still haven't we still haven't gotten to him yet, but we're gonna get there soon.
I
But
like the implication that he has a first name and a last name, and it's not just one name and 2 words.
yeah, but yeah, so they were created after Helrix, and yeah, we should talk about some of what they did at this time, because they also helped the Matoran with their labors in the same way that Helrix did.
Whereas
But
Helix was spearheading a lot of the labor over at Mata Nui, the Telemata were mostly tasked with guarding the core of the universe over at Carta Nui, which was eventually going to serve as the spark to Mata Nui's light later down the road. But during this time, the Telemata were essentially, guarding the heart while Helix guarded the brain as these things came into being.
yeah, that makes sense. So, the one last thing we got to talk about with Toa is the process of Toa evolution and how they come into being. So this is a big subject that's very important to the Bionicle story. Some of you might know this, but Toa and Matoran are fundamentally connected.
No, really?
Yeah, so Myotis, would you mind just walking us through really quick just the process of Toa to or Matoran to Toa to Turaga?
So, you start off your life as a Matoran, one of these standard issue workers. You've got this little bit of power, but not much, and you basically do the same thing all day, every day. Uh, but you know it's got to be done, so you're okay with your job. And then one day, you see this brave, red armored or whatever color armor, tall, giant warrior who is twice your size, who comes over to you and hands you a rock and says, "You are to be the next Toa. It is your destiny. You must responsibly use this power to defend the Matoran and honor Mata Nui." So you take it, and then you transform this glowing sequence of lights and colors. And then now you are suddenly twice as tall, and you get these weapons that are actually tools, not weapons, because this is Lego people. And you can suddenly access the powers of your mask, and you can access great, incredible elemental powers, including the power to create, absorb, and control your element. And you go and you have great adventures. You fight evil, you defend the Matoran, you do the occasional actual work, but like mostly you're adventuring, because that's what cool people do. And then you've had enough. You're tired, your energy is spent, and most importantly, your destiny is fulfilled. Because every Toa, and in fact, every being in the Matoran universe, has some kind of destiny that they need to fulfill. So, once you as a Toa have fulfilled your destiny, it is time for you to retire. So you can transfer your power into a new Toa stone and find the next Matoran who is destined to become a Toa and pass it off. and this will transform you into a Turaga. Your power is weakened significantly, but you now have all of the experiences from your time as a Toa, your great wisdom, and so you can go on and become a new leader to guide the Matoran and the next generation of Toa in helping keep the universe running and defending the Matoran.
Yeah, that's that's basically it. Ironically, that also happens to me. Every time I go to KFC, which is a strange. I don't go to KFC anymore, because but yeah, basically, the Matoran become Toa through the process of Toa stones, which a Toa stone is an item. I don't even think it needs to be a stone necessarily, but it's an item that is infused with Toa power, and whenever a Matoran is exposed to that, it basically functions as like a supercharged battery or something, which invokes immediate. I don't want to say mutation, but like that's basically what it is, and they turn into a Toa, and eventually, down the road, a Toa might decide to give up those powers. His destiny has been fulfilled. His purpose has been finished, and then he can function in a more leaderly like a more leaderly position, and then he gives up those powers, puts them into Toa stones, usually, and passes it on to the next generation of Matoran. So it's kind of similar to the life cycle of humanity in some extent, but you know,
Similar enough that a child will rationalize it like that and understand it.
yeah, it's easy to
Which is the
understand from the
point, of
human
course.
perspective.
It's like the human life cycle if we were Pokemon.
Yeah,
Except, of course, even the Matoran are potentially thousands of years old when they go from the child stage to the adult stage, but that's another matter for a later podcast.
yeah. So
When you're dealing with like beings like these, they all process time differently anyway.
Yeah.
true. Okay, so now we've finished with the first section of the Matoran universe timeline. We've gone through this Age of Darkness, to kind of reiterate a lot of aimless toil. The Matoran are come into existence, and they're all led by Tren Krom. Mata Nui is constructed along with Artaka and Karzani, these three islands that kind of work to keep the Matoran functioning and laboring well. Toa come into existence as protectors, and also, some they help out the Matoran with their tasks. Maybe there might be a really heavy box that the Matoran can't lift, that the Toa might have to use, and then of course there's Toa evolution, that the process of transitioning from uh, Matoran to Toa to Turaga. Before we continue, though, should we talk about the do we need to talk about the generation of the Anika build within the context of this, or should
You
we?
have the Oh, sorry.
So I'm asking you specifically, Basil.
Okay, well, I feel like that ought to come just a little bit later. We should
Okay.
probably get for the awakening of Mata Nui a little bit first, and like cover some of that ground, since that's where the that build will really develop a bit, because it's sort of tied to Matoran gaining a stronger sense of self and a stronger sense of how they view Toa at the time.
Yeah. Okay.
So we'll get to that when we get to it.
All right. So we're gonna start the awakening section, and we're gonna go ahead and jump into that. Also,
And then there was light.
hello, Erudite Prime. I see you talking to me in the chat. Yes, I see you. I acknowledge you. I love you. All right, so let's talk about Mata Nui.
Now we get to the big man himself. Once the universe is finally finished being built, Mata Nui is finally awakened, and light is bestowed on the universe. The twin suns rise over Mata Nui for the very first time. I believe I have even a little quote written down, if you want to roll with it or not. I always like the idea of like Mata Nui very specifically, stepping up and establishing himself much more warmly to Matoran compared to someone like Tren Crom. So
Yeah,
lines I was rolling with was something to the tune of like, I am Mata Nui, I am your world. Expand forthwith, tame its wilds, and make it yours. Labor in my name, and the stars and sky shall forever shine.
I give that
Or something
about
pretend.
I give that about a 7 out of 10. It was a good delivery. Of course, you
I'm
don't have.
sorry, I'm no Michael Dorn. I'm doing my best here.
Well,
Maybe I'll
the
turn
other
into a toe when my toe stones have only dropped two. I don't know.
But yeah, so Matanui is the they call him the Great Spirit, and basically he Trencrom kind of passes. He is no
he
longer
gets
in
locked in a
that.
cave.
I mean, yes, he
Let's
gets
just be
locked in a
clear.
cave, but he passes on, and in his place that allows Matanui to enter into this leadership position over the universe where he can communicate with the Matoran and everything. So, what he brings with him, you mentioned, is light, and that comes in the form of bodies of light that exist over these cities that have been created, specifically the twin suns in Metru Nui come to life, and they shine down upon the city. This is the first light that the Matoran have experienced besides just the light from the Avmatoran. So it's a pretty big deal. Yeah, and they see him as a very kind and benevolent great spirit because of this gift that he's given them. And whenever the suns are out, it's much easier to work than just in pitch black darkness. It's also at this time that the the great beings, they pass away from they leave the Matoran universe completely. Like, we're not gonna have they bring Matanui in, and they deliver him to his people, the Matoran, and then they kind of just peace out. So they don't come into the story again. They remain they remain as mysterious as they were. Do we need to mention anything else about Matanui before continuing? I don't think so.
He
Mata
becomes
himself, no.
super
Yeah.
important later. Just
Yeah.
not yet.
I mean, he's basically the god of the play. He's not that important though. Right now, he'll get more important later. Listen,
Yeah,
um,
he's a pretty
Yeah.
deadbeat dad from day one.
uh, so yes, the next thing is Cardanui. So we mentioned Cardanui a little bit, but
These are the 2008 sets, if you're curious.
yeah. So in 2008, there's some Cardanui content, but
We're not making this up.
at this time, Carden Nui was basically this land that was far, far to the south of Metru Nui and Artaka and Karzani, and it wasn't really. I mean, it wasn't, from what I understand, it wasn't meant to really be something that, like, Metru Nui was an epicenter of labor and prosperity and all of this stuff that Cardanui just wasn't. Cardanui was more, the Matoran who lived there and everything, they weren't working on the same type of infrastructure. This was a lot more mysterious.
And of course, when Mata Nui finally awakened, much of Carta Nui was locked off as it was suddenly bathed in light and energy that helped to, at least as far as we know, infuse power into the rest of the universe, helping to light the sky and warm the air and all the other basic necessities that you probably want out of your little universe.
Hmm.
And whereas for Carta Nui itself, all those that worked on it, like the Apatoran, essentially were locked away to continue their labor. And the Tawamata, presumably, were also taken away to be locked here as well, where they would forever disappear until such a day came where they would be needed again, presumably if the time of darkness ever returned. But in the meantime, everything's bright and shiny and wonderful. We don't need guys like those.
Yeah, and
We're
so
we're
the
good.
the Avmatoran, did you mention the Avmatoran disappearing at this time too?
Yeah, I
Sorry,
yeah, I just mentioned them alongside.
I was saying I was answering messages, so I got distracted there.
Oh, gotcha.
All right,
Oop.
yeah, so they disappear at the same time as the Tawamata. Um,
Never to be seen again.
yeah, so
Just
the
don't
the
jump
light
ahead.
reveals, like it fully reveals Metro Nui, and but there are a couple of other islands that are revealed as well when the light springs up, right? It's not
This is
just
yeah, this is where Artaka and Karzani's roles really come into play as these two become fully visible to everyone, and their roles in that trinity alongside Metro Nui that we mentioned before finally become solidified here as people have a greater sense of what's going on. There's a brief little bit where there's a little contest between a couple of super powerful beings over who gets to preside over either of these lands and gets to name themselves after them. Kind of comes and goes. One of them gets curb stomped. It gets stuck with Karzani.
yeah. So there's a lot of stuff kind of going on in this era outside of Matoran history. Like some interactions that occur between these like titanic beings. The things are shifting and settling into the order that they will become. One of the big issues at this time is that there isn't much in the universe besides just the Matoran, Toa, and a couple of legendary beings. So Mata Nui has an idea. And his idea is to create some beings to assist him in adding flora and fauna to this new universe. And so let's talk about the Brotherhood of Makuta.
This turns out to be a great decision, and nothing bad is ever going to come of it. This will always definitely end well and not produce any major villains later in the franchise.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, so yeah, basically, Matanui creates this material called antidermis, which we don't need to get into all of that, but basically, he creates this liquid called antidermis, and then he makes the Makuta out of said liquid. And so that liquid gives them a couple of unique traits at this time, if I remembered. So Basil, let's talk about that. So what exactly are the Makuta?
Well, at the time, in terms of like layout, they are still biomechanical and aren't all that different from the Toa or the Matoran outside of being hulking masses of black armor with a few extra powers to spare. But the main idea here was that yeah, very are imbued with these. I believe it was like what 40 different powers altogether, and the ability to shape the
42.
universe even 42. Yeah. Uh, it can't be any nice little simple number. It's got to be something totally random. But the idea here is that they can essentially shape the universe even more directly than the Toa ever could. And to that end, are also able to create, the plant life and the wildlife that comes to populate the universe and become more. As you could liken their role to a bit closer to what Trent Crom served, and that now they sort of become this wider governing force hanging over the Matoran. Not really stepping in too much, but because of the power they possess, they're able to step in and resolve any larger conflicts that arise that the Toa necessarily can't.
Yeah, it's like it's like your big older brother. Like you don't want them, or it's like they don't want to get involved with your business, but if you ever get your get your shit rocked or something, like they'll roll up and help you out when the time arises. But yeah, the big thing that the Makuta do is they have the power to forge these creatures called Rahi, which basically just means animal or like other than Matoran. Basically, they can create animals, so they build a wide variety of flora and fauna to spread across the universe. Any any Bionicle set that is like an animal or some creature that you remember in the run or whatever was probably created by the Makuta at some point. Because
Except
that's
the dinosaur in 2009.
yeah, yeah. Ignore the dinosaur from 2009, but everything else is probably created by the Makuta. Um, And yeah, so the Makuta were the first beings created by Mata Nui specifically. So they were considered to be the beings closest to the heart of Mata Nui specifically, charged with carrying out Mata Nui's will and safeguarding the Matoran who Mata Nui was sworn to protect. So it's kind of like the idea is that they were the direct spawn of Mata Nui instead of because the Matoran technically came before Mata Nui. So it's a little bit of just how the Matoran felt and how they were perceived. Um, at this time, we talked a little bit about Matoran becoming Toa and Toa becoming Turaga, which is like the weaker version. But at this point, the first Turaga was created in Metru Nui.
Well, the first Saraga was like created before the Awakening altogether, but now that things have finally started to fall into place and infrastructure has started to take
Oh, okay,
shape,
yeah.
that first Saraga, well, yeah, because the first Saraga was also created as a Turaga, like the Toa were, and this first Saraga, like the Toa, served as examples of all other Toa to follow. This first Saraga took over leadership of Metru Nui and sort of established what Turaga would be for everyone else across the universe, sort of serving as the elder chiefs that would preside over everyone else, while Toa acted more like enforcers or protectors.
Yeah, and something that's interesting is the we actually do know the name of the first Matoran, which was Takua, and the name of the first Toa was Helrix, but we don't actually know the name of the first Turaga. It's still trapped in mystery that was never established in the canon, and I don't believe we're going to establish a name for it within the Mangai series either, just because the mystery of not knowing the first Taraga's real name, I think, is kind of it's cool. It's
What we do know is that it was not Turaga Duma, who is, of course, a prominent character in the manga, because he used to be a Toa.
yeah,
He
there
comes
there were a
about
couple
later.
of Taraga who a couple of Taraga that existed in between the Duma and the first Taraga. So
Yeah, it
Right.
was probably a Slicer set or something.
who knows? Um, Yeah, and so one of the Taraga's roles within Metru Nui is, well, we won't get into that yet. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about um, creativity within the minds of the Matoran at this time. So, many years had passed since the times of darkness, and laboring in the infinite void. So something started to happen within the minds of the Matoran, and the seeds of creativity started to flourish.
Or abstract concepts started to take shape within their heads, and generally just started to form a stronger sense of self, a greater desire to distinguish themselves from one another. Places had to start having specific names. I can't just call that bridge anymore. I can't just call that mountain anymore. I got to slap a fancy name on that. That'll sound nice. This village has to has a name, and so on and so forth. There's a greater sense that they need to define themselves in some way.
Yeah, and so architecture began to change. Like initially, it was very functional, just for the like sake of being functional. But as this process of creativity and free thinking began to sink itself into the minds of the Matoran, like that led to variation within their architecture. That led to like a Pomatoran, sitting there, and like maybe you want to construct something just for the sake of constructing something, like I'm gonna make a big old statue, I'm gonna make a, and so initially at the onset of the universe, that would have that wouldn't have even occurred to them. But as these ideas continue to fester in their heads and pop out, some we get some you. I would say this is the it's like the or the Silver Age of the Matoran, where they begin to construct new ideas and new concepts.
And this is where myths really start to take shape as well, especially how the Toa are revered. At
Yeah,
first they're just kind of seen as, people just serving their role the same way the Matoran do. But with this greater sense of self comes a newfound admiration for what the Toa are and the inspiration they serve. And of
yeah,
course comes our attempt to maybe work in a little explanation for the use of builds over the years.
yeah. So, unfortunately, I don't have any visual representations. I will try to add these in post. But basically, there are a couple of different Toa designs that were used throughout the years. Um, we're going to just speak about these in terms of like the progression of the universe itself, not necessarily the progression that the toys were sold in. But initially, you have the very simplistic designs like Helrix and the Toa Mata. And if you look at those designs, they're very simplistic. They're very bare bones, and they're purely functional, and which reflects the outset of the Matoran out at that time. And as Toa, like this new age of creativity and legends begins, they start to the Toa designs begin to become more what's the word I'm looking for here? Legendary might be a good one, but it's basically it's as the Matoran's perspectives change on the Toa, they begin to adapt to a more heroic stance and posture. They adopt the Anika build, is what it's called in the Bionicle community, because the first sets that had the build were the Anika. But
Despite being one of the most recent Toa teams in the story,
yeah,
one of the last.
despite it being a more recent uh, released Toa build, the Anika build actually comes up much earlier with characters like not that anybody who is just now coming into the lore needs to know these names. This is purely for people who have been in the Bionicle community, but like characters like Jovan and Lesovic and stuff like that. They have the Anika build, and it comes from this legendary idealization of the Toa. And then later on, we will see a different design come up called the Metru build, which is a little bit more realistic and represents a coming to terms with like the Toa are heroic, but they are just beings. They aren't gods or anything like that. So it gets a little
And
bit
that
more
build is
refined.
and that build is important to know because that is the most common Toa build you will see in the animated series The Mangai.
Yeah, so because that occurs near much later in the universe. So we'll get there eventually. But sorry for that little tirade out there and going off on. We're coming back into the awakening, but that's just an example of how their new creativity can lead to a lot of these wide differences within the universe. So again, like this creativity does not just exist in Mata Nui; it extends to the other islands as well. The things that they're constructing and the things that the Matoran are working on continue to adapt and evolve with these new thoughts. Something that is interesting though is they discover that that Metru Nui, Artaka, and Karzani are not the only islands that exist in the universe. There are others far to the south. So let's talk a little bit about the spread of the Matoran throughout the universe.
Well, the spread had already started to occur even as early as a little bit at the time of darkness and like the initial awakening of Mata Nui period. But much like everyone else, there wasn't really much in purpose or identity in the way people would, stake their claims on different lands and start to divvy themselves up. They just sort of found somewhere to settled there, and just kind of went about their business. Village number 5, village number 6, and so forth. But with the awakening, now everyone is feeling a little more emboldened to distinguish these villages. Tribes are starting to separate themselves a little bit. There's a little sense of kinship and identity formed about where everyone is deciding to, settle up, and of course distinguish their own villages by names. Of course, the creativity isn't quite reflected in a lot of the land masses. We're still getting northern continent and southern continent here, but baby steps.
Yeah, and so in the image that we have on screen, those are um, these things called airships. But one of the things that's important as the Matoran continue to spread out is they still need resources from Metru Nui in order to, they need Kanohi masks, they need discs, they need materials that they can use to build these new settlements. And so these transportation vessels are constructed in order to, and so an early form of trade between islands starts to happen, and society, culture, all of these things blossom and come forth at this time. One of the downsides, though, is we need to talk about death, specifically death among the inhabitants of the universe, because this is something that they had never experienced before until this point.
As we've said before, a lot of the time before this was a little hazy and hard to describe, almost dreamlike. But as things become more solid, people begin to realize that, huh, people die when they get killed. That's a little strange. I
Which
guess
strangely had never happened before. Like if they died before, they would just, like, if some building crushed them or something, they would die, and then like a week or two later they would just reappear in their position. Like they would make their way back into Metru Nui and and fulfill that same task that they were doing before. But that stopped happening, kind of. From the Matoran's perspective, they had no idea why this occurred. I imagine some of them assumed it might be because of the new creativity and sentience that they achieved.
I think the thing about that whole hazy dream that they perceive the past, it's like they never really understood what was going on. People just sort of came and went and didn't really understand that death did not exist because, well, they had nothing to contrast it against. Now that they're a little more quote unquote awake now, I feel like death would just sort of become something they would understand as, well, I guess maybe this has always been the case. We just never understood it because they don't fully remember everything before this time. Everything before is a little hazier, little unclear compared to now.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Um, yeah, let's. So the last thing that we need to talk about in this era is this is it'll be appearing on your screen in a minute. This is a map of the Matoran universe and in its totality. So as the Matoran continue to explore this vast universe, then something that became an issue that Mata Nui became aware of is that the Makuta could only do so much to ensure the safety of Matoran, and again, like the Toa could only do so much, and so the idea came about to create species, like intelligent species in a similar manner to the Makuta, to inhabit these other islands in the stead of Matoran. So there were six of those, correct?
There are quite a few other species in general, but yes, we do get like the six core species that are, helping to sort of fill out the ranks of labor in various regards across the universe.
Yeah, and
And
so
of course,
the farther you go south, the less inhabitable it becomes, right? This
yes.
universe. And in terms of Matoran history, there aren't really any records of Matoran living on the farthest south islands. Am I correct?
We don't know too much about it in general because of how all we know is that not the most friendly wildlife dwelled down there, and so no one ever really felt all that encouraged to venture much further. So what lurks down there is pretty unknown to everybody.
If
You
somebody,
know,
if yeah,
some poor sods might be able to make a living out there, but Lord knows we don't want to meet them.
yeah, and no communications ever came back from that area. Otherwise we'd have some knowledge of that within the history of the Matoran, which we do not. So that it is a big question mark. There are a lot of lands to the south that just don't have much information. And as you can see, also most of them are not named, which goes along with that. Um, but yeah, basically there are six prime species that are created,
Plus a
and
whole bunch of others who we'll talk about later.
yeah, we'll talk about them later. But the six prime species, each of them had a leader who was now were they created to rule over these species, or did they make their way up through the ranks?
It's a story we'd like to tell everybody else that they were created to be rulers, but that was their fancy way of perceiving it because as a few can attest, a lot of these folks did serve as aides and servants to other more powerful beings over the years. So anyone that knows them a little better knows they were not created to rule, and that was something they more seized for themselves. And then like to play up little bit of manifest destiny afterwards. That hey, this is what we were always meant to be. This is what we were meant to do. So deal with it.
Okay, yeah. So there were these six beings who came out of these six different species, and they named themselves the Baraki, which
And then
meant
they became the six best sets.
yeah, we did get sets of them, but basically the Baraki were these warlords who decided to conquer the universe. And we won't get into that yet. That will be the next podcast, but it'll give you something to look forward to. And yeah, we will talk about the threat of the Baraki in the next one. Here's an overlook at our timeline again, which will be appearing in a second. Basically, we covered the first two ages of the Matoran universe. We talked about the era of darkness, in which there was just aimless toil, and Tren Krom and islands being built and Toa and all that good stuff. And then we covered the second age, which had to do with the Matoran kind of awakening and Mata Nui, like igniting a spark within the universe, the suns, and this idea of like this uh, golden age of prosperity and art and culture and trade, and like there's just this youthful perspective on going out into the world and finding what you can see. Unfortunately, death came along with that, but you can't win them all. And we got the six prime species who are going to be a much bigger issue in the next age. But for now, they are very they're pretty chill for right now. All
Free
right,
will has a habit of breeding very different types of people.
yeah, that is true. So I guess let's go and let's talk questions. So I'm going to kind of look at the process of the chat, and let's see if we can.
So first question is, what constitutes soon? This was back at the beginning in reference to when we're starting. So
uh,
the answer to that is negative about an hour and a half.
yeah, about that. Let me see. Are you guys even reading the chat? Yes, that is true. I know there were a couple, so I'm still kind of going through this.
I know
Is this in?
Nyrian was asking about the time slip a little bit because when we were talking about the Matoran, I think he was wondering what kind of connection their sort of isolation from Matoran society connected to the time slip later, and I think there might have been a little bit of conflation there. But to come back to that a little bit, the idea is that the Matoran during this time just sort of isolate themselves and don't really like their main role was to help guide everyone else through the time of darkness, and now that it's over, much like the Toamata, they don't really have a reason to, be out and about in the wider universe anymore, and so they more keep to themselves. Whereas the time slip is a more direct attempt to hide them from the Makuta, but that comes much, 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 much later. And right now, this is disconnected from that. Time slip's a totally different thing.
Yeah, so and to answer another question in a similar vein, somebody's asking about the Hand of Artaka and all of that stuff. The Hand of Artaka existed, as far as I know, or it existed within that first age of darkness. It was before Mata Nui came into being. And so the reason we didn't really cover that in the main podcast is just because the Matoran wouldn't really have been aware of they wouldn't really have been aware of that secret society to any extent. So we felt it was a little out of scope. But yeah, basically, this they existed in the first age as a secret society, kind of protecting or preparing the world for Mata Nui to enter it, and then they disbanded once Mata Nui entered the universe. Um, So yeah, we talked about Hand of Artaka, and then there was a another question about didn't the Makuta guide state that they didn't travel beyond Artidax? Is that the Matoran specifically, or are we talking about the Makuta?
I think the idea is like just how much people would know in general. I mean, I think there are other folks in those comments that are clarifying it. Like, there's a general understanding that it was barren and worthless, and even the Makuta didn't know too much about them other than that.
Yeah, yeah. So, I think that's all the questions we have, in case, unless anybody has any other ones. Somebody asked where a lot of the images came from. Most of them are from Bionicle World, which is a book that was published in 2008 with a question mark.
No, 2007, because like it
2007.
goes as far, yeah, it goes as far as Mari Nui, and the very last thing it mentions is is like the so-called agent being blinded by the light of the Mask of Life mutating the Toamari.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. And then some of the other images came from the Faber files, and the background that you see right now is one of our concept arts for the for episode 1. So, speaking of the Mongai series, let's talk a little bit about project news, just to give everybody a little bit of an update on where we are in terms of production and just like kind of what's coming up next, all kinds of stuff. So, the first thing is obviously we did not make our release date of 2023, which was I mean, like whenever I created that date back in 2022, or sorry, the release date was 2022. My bad. Um, Whenever I created that date back in 2021, I was um, very optimistic with how to of the speed at which 2D animation is produced.
He
So
was also very, very new at this.
yeah, that too. So there was a lot of work that we did behind the scenes. You know, establishing income, establishing contacts, establishing teams, hierarchies, all kinds of stuff that just took way longer than expected. But you know, it's all part of the growing pains, and we want to lay this stuff out early so that we can, so that we get a better product at the end. So that's the state of everything right now. I'm hesitant to give out a specific release date, but internally we've been talking a little bit about April 2023. is kind of at least in terms of how the estimates of how quickly we're getting stuff done would be April, but there's always the possibility of a delay. But unlike other projects, I'm not going to name specific projects or anything. I'm just talking about like the history of Bionicle projects. We do actually have progress being made as we speak. We just came out of, or we're just going to have some meetings this Sunday where we're going to be presenting new animatics and animations that we've been commissioning, and different stuff like that, and we're starting coloring and things like that. So things are definitely happening, but yeah, it's just a little bit later than we would have imagined, but it will be there. We will get it out. Other things that we've got going on is we have our second project staff review coming out. I just need to finish the editing process, and obviously I've been busy with this podcast, so I didn't want to distract from that. But we have the interview with our publicity manager, Lerla, and that is going to be coming out in the next couple of days. So expect that very soon, because like legitimately there isn't that much work that I need to do on it. I just need to give it a once over and
Yeah, he made me do half the work on that.
yeah, the pains of being in publicity. But I'm trying to think, what else do we have? We have the audiobook for Tales, or the audio drama for Tales of the Mongai Chapter 2 is is almost ready to be released. We're still working on the audio and some of the sound mixing. But if you liked Tales of the Mongai Chapter 1, that audio drama that's on our YouTube channel, you're going to love the second one. It's a little bit longer, but it covers the fall of the Toa Fortress and some early stuff with Likan. So it's gonna be very good, and the still images for that audiobook or audio drama are just gorgeous. We haven't really shared any of them. I'm keeping them pretty close to the chest for this, but they're going to knock your socks off to say the least. And if you haven't yet, go out and read Basil's Tales of the Mongai Chapter 3 story, which the part 1 is the only part that's out right now. You can you can read that on our website, and part 2 will be coming out sometime soon. Uh, we want to build up a little suspense before part 2, right, Basil?
Suppose at this point I'm just totally desensitized to the ending here, but I hope everyone else is going to get excited for it.
I mean, I like the ending. It's he okay, so Basil had this whole thing where he was like stressed that it was going to be, too long or something like that, and I legitimately sat down, read this whole thing, and then I was like, it didn't feel long. What do you like? It is technically the longest one we've done, but you really don't feel it. And I think that's the best testament to a good story, is if you can sit down and read through a whole thing, and like, it doesn't feel like you've been sitting there for as long as you have.
The main thing here is that, like, when you lay the outline out, I never wanted it to necessarily be that long. The length was more something that was, I guess, discovered is the right word. As you're pacing the story out, you decide how much time and words and descriptions are needed for each scene. And I just kind of came to that length as, like, this is how long it needs to be, and hopefully everyone else, feels the same way once taking it all in. But I also think that's why, pacing it out like this amongst multiple parts was also very important, because I want to give you guys a chance to have a good stopping point and a break. It's a tall ask going through a solid 50-ish pages. Believe you me.
Yeah, so and then I guess the last thing is, expect another one of these coming up soon. We're going to do, it might not be the same cast. With the idea with the Man Guys podcast is to have completely different people each time. So we'll see if it's actually completely different people. Like sometimes we might have a recurring cast member. But basically, the idea is, we want to give you guys a view of like a sneak peek into the behind the scenes process and everything. And you're not going to get all of that from just us, and you're also not going to get the same level of, Basil and I might be. Basil Myotis and I might be very well versed on the first two ages, but we might not know as much about the age of the Six Kingdoms, age of all that. So expect different people next time, but it'll still be the same story, and we'll still be going through the same general breakdown. Is there anything else that we need to? Yeah, I guess this would be a good time to plug Basil. I know you have a YouTube channel that
I
everybody here needs to be subscribed to.
I do, also called a pinch of basil. Basically, where I dump whatever flights of fancy I get in my head, whether it's memes or trailers or just fun little rescores and exercises. Fun stuff.
Yeah, you have you have a couple of movie trailer edits of the Bionicle movies that I make a pilgrimage out to every once in a while to watch.
I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
it's good stuff.
I'll probably
And
return to those at some point. Wink,
Myotis,
wink,
do you?
nudge, nudge. I've had a 1,000 subscriber special in the can for a while now, but I'm hoping to get out within the next month or two. Kind of coming
Hey,
back to us to one of the Bionicle movies at least, and maybe do one for the upcoming anniversary for Massive Light this year. I'll see if I can get that done by Bionicle Day. That's gonna be fun.
now, how long until you start making fan edits of like Mongai Project content?
Well, I'm gonna need some content first.
Ah, crap! You're right. All right. And then Myotis, I can't remember. Do you have? I think you mentioned you have like a smaller YouTube channel. Was that right?
I have a YouTube channel that I made sock puppet videos on for extra credit in high school history.
Oh, right. Okay, that's what it was. Yeah. Hell yeah. So it's definitely subscribe to Myotis's sock puppet YouTube channel. Excellent
Very gory
content.
sock puppet studios.wordpress.com.
Oh god, there's a website too. Oh
Yeah.
no. All right, guys, but we'll definitely check out, all of our manga project stuff. Keep an ear out on the YouTube channel. We're gonna have some new stuff coming out in the next couple of weeks, and we will see you all next time. Have a great night.